So as I've already said, there will be a short panel discussion. We've got a lot of talks to get through today, lots of really exciting things going on in Manchester and Greater Manchester. So it'll be fantastic to hear from all the wonderful panellists that we have today, and there will be time at the end for some questions. And that is it from a Zoom perspective. So before we get into it, my name's Ellie, hello. And welcome to today's Transforming Greater Manchester event. So this event is hosted by members of the Manchester Nature Consortium and is also part of the Manchester Festival of Nature, which is an annual event that takes place every June and celebrates the incredible wildlife and wild places that we have here in Greater Manchester. For the last 2 years, we've been virtual for obvious reasons, but we really hope to be joining you all again next year at Heaton Park, so do look out for that. But this is one of the events as part of this year's Festival of Nature. We also have another event on Sunday with the Manchester Nature Consortium Youth Panel, so definitely check that out. And head over to our Twitter page on the Sunday as well. So that's Sunday the 27th of June. And the Twitter page is @MancNature, and you can keep up with all of the action for this year's Festival of Nature over there. So the Manchester Nature Consortium, it's a group of the leading conservation organisations in the Northwest, along with some education organisations as well. So with that, we have a lot to get through today. So with that, I will stop talking now and I will hand over to our first speaker, my wonderful colleague, Jenny Benyon, who is here to talk to you all about peatlands. So take it away, Jenny.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ellie. Thank you for giving me the chance to come and tell everybody just how much I love peat tonight. So I'm just going to share my screen. Here we go. Hopefully you can all see that. Make it present. There we go. So hopefully everyone can see that. If someone on the panel could just give me a little nod and say it's working, right? Lovely. Thank you, everyone. Right. So I've just got 5 minutes to talk to you tonight. So it's a complete whistle-stop tour of peat. Basically, my name's Jenny. I work for the Lancashire Peatlands Initiative, which is part of the Wildlife Trust for Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside. And I'm here today to talk to you about the peatlands that are on your doorstep. Now, you may not know that Greater Manchester is actually full of peat and it's surrounded by peat, which are these amazing, amazing habitats. Really important part of our kind of overall ecosystem. But things haven't gone... So that slide moved on. There we go. Things haven't gone too well for a lot of our peatlands. In our region alone, 98% of our lowland raised peat bogs have been lost. And actually in Greater Manchester itself, in the areas around connecting up kind of Salford, Wigan and Warrington, it used to be one of the UK's largest lowland raised peat bogs, known as Chat Moss. But actually, if you look at the former extent of Chat Moss now, that figure rises to around 99%. 99% of this amazing habitat has been lost. But why? What's the big problem? What's so amazing about peatlands? Well, basically, they are totally amazing. They have kind of this top 5 really wonderful ecosystem service benefits that they can provide for us. They're a really important habitat. And what I'm going to do is just sort of whiz through the top 2 there. So first of all, they are amazingly important for biodiversity. Now, you may be aware that we are facing a looming biodiversity crisis. 41% of our species are either declining in numbers or facing extinction, which is absolutely terrifying. But peatlands provide a home for a lot of amazing and wonderful, really rare and specialised wildlife. We have a fantastic array of animal species that use peatlands and call them home. But it's not just animals. It's really wonderful plant life that we find on our peatlands as well. So probably the most important of these is down there on the bottom left-hand corner, the purple and gold little funny thing, and that is Sphagnum Moss. Now that is the keystone species of peat. That is literally peat before it becomes peat. As it decays and decomposes in these really special, very acidic, oxygen poor conditions of peatlands, the moss literally turns into peat. It's not just the moss, we've got some really cool plant species that live on there as well, including carnivorous plants, which we actually do have native carnivorous plants in the UK. The one front and centre, the red one, is actually a carnivorous plant called the sundew, but my favourite is down in that bottom right-hand corner, that bit of slimy looking pondweed. That's lesser bladderwort. That is actually the fastest creature on Earth. It is an aquatic carnivorous plant, and it is able to react to and suck little tiny aquatic insects into these sort of little bladder things it has on its leaves in under 1/10,000th of a second, which is completely insane. And this lives in bog pools just outside Salford. We're actually incredibly lucky that we even have this plant at all. But it's not just that. Peatlands are amazingly important, vital natural resources in our fight against climate change, because they are able to absorb and store huge amounts of carbon. When they are healthy and happy and wet and boggy, they literally suck carbon in from the atmosphere and store it and sequester it away in their peaty soils for millennia. Unfortunately, as soon as they are drained, degraded, or damaged in any way, that carbon gets released. So you can see there, globally, peatlands store twice as much carbon as forests, which is completely amazing when you think that they only cover around somewhere between 3 and 5% of the Earth's surface. But the minute that essentially human interaction does something to damage them, then that carbon starts to get released, and that contributes to climate change. 5% of our total UK greenhouse gas emissions in the UK come from degraded peatlands. And when you go globally, emissions from degraded peatlands outweigh that of both aviation and shipping combined. It is a huge problem. And so we really, really need to care and need to look after our peatlands. And that's what we here at the Lancashire Peatlands Initiative are trying to do. But our peatlands aren't always in a great state. This is Little Woolden Moss, which sits just kind of on the border of Salford and Warrington, just outside Earlham. And this is Little Woolden Moss in 2008. Little Woolden Moss was being commercially extracted for its peat. Huge drainage ditches that you can see there were being dug, all the water was drained out, the vegetation was stripped off the top, and then these massive diggers came in and literally dug the peat out of the ground. Why? Well, peat is used in the horticultural industry to fill the bags of compost that you might buy when you go to the garden centre. So if you're going and buying a bag of compost to do a bit of gardening and it doesn't have peat-free splashed all over it, then it will contain peat that will have been dug up from a peatland somewhere in the world. Some of them contain as much as 95% peat. But it's not just compost we've got to think about. Peat is also used as a growing media for a lot of the plants that we buy in our garden centres, you know, to attract beautiful pollinators and stuff in. Unfortunately, a lot of them are grown in peat. In fact, 2 million cubic metres of peat is used in the UK by the horticultural industry every year, which is huge. But there is hope, because 70% of this is used by the domestic market. So that means that if everyone went out tomorrow and stopped buying peat-based products for their gardens, we could cut that number down by 70%. Now, the government has committed to removing the sales of peat to domestic horticulture by the end of this parliamentary session in 2024, which is a really great thing, but we need it also to stop now. So what I'm asking everyone to do, and this is the last thing, is please go peat-free and help save our precious peatlands that are on your doorstep now. I will stop sharing. Thank you very much. And then, thanks everybody. That's the fastest I've ever talked about Pete, I think, and I did go over time. I'm sorry, Ellie. But now I'm gonna pass on to the wonderful Rachel Webster, who's from Manchester Museum, who's going to tell us all about Manchester's wonderful wildflowers. So take it away, Rachel.
Hello. So, thank you, Jenny. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. So, hello, I'm Rachel Webster. I'm the Curator of Botany at Manchester Museum. We're part of the University of Manchester and we're sat on Oxford Road. Our collection is 4.5 million objects, and we look to use that to build an understanding between cultures and to build a sustainable world. And for me, that means trying to get our 900,000 strong botany collections used by people. So that might be using them for, sorry, it's not moving on a slide. Oh, what's happened? There we go. Using them to in exhibitions for people to come in and study, or to have in events and education sessions. And so I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people that plants are wildlife too, and not just the scenery. So thank you, Jenny, for sharing some of the most amazing facts on carnivorous plants there, which are some of the stars and the exciting parts of the plant world. But when you say wildflowers to people these days, often what pops into everyone's head first off is planting them. So planting wildflowers for nature as a kind of wildlife garden activity that we can all take to make spaces for nature in and around our parks and gardens or window boxes or what have you. But what you'll find if you talk to a botanist really is that we spend a lot of our time fertling around in car parks or in verges and in neglected areas behind people's properties and around bits of the park. Because also for me, wildflowers means those things that got there themselves, the stuff that just appeared and got there of its own accord. And for many people, they'd be considering those to be weeds, really, which is a word that makes botany curators shiver. And sometimes you hear people using the word volunteers, which is a lot more exciting, meaning something that just spontaneously appeared. So I'm going to try and encourage the widening of wildflowers to be the things that just appear spontaneously that you weren't expecting, and not just the things that we plant out there hoping to help wildlife. So one thing you do hear people saying is that it's like, oh, if I don't plant things there, then there won't be any wildflowers. But I mean, botanically speaking, we're ignoring the 5th largest flowering plant family of the grasses, which were probably there to begin with if we just left it and stopped mowing and let something go wild. But also, to have an act of zoology for a moment, what we're usually doing is we're planting for pollinators. So we're creating lovely pollinator banquets for those generalist bees and butterflies and flies that can go on and suck off the pollen and the nectar and so on. What we spend an awful lot less time thinking about is all those things that actually eat plants. So the things which have either adults who are grazing on plants or stuff that requires certain kinds of plants for their larvae to live off. So it's sort of ironic that we make lots of spaces for pollinators but think an awful lot less about where their caterpillars are going to be living. And so often these are also things that we don't really like. So nettles and docks and thistles. And so we spend a lot of time creating wildflower meadows that are really sort of servicing our aesthetic needs more than perhaps the wildlife that needs to live there. So one of the things that I want to start thinking about is just how much we are going to be prepared to live around. So this year it's been really exciting to see how many people have taken up Plant Life's No Mow May campaign, and there's been a lot more love for dandelions on Twitter lately, not least because they've been bringing birds like goldfinches down into everybody's gardens to eat away on the glorious seed heads that are sitting there. So over the next couple of years in the museum, we'll be opening our new gallery spaces. And one of the bits of in urban places like Manchester. So I worry about the kind of shifting baselines, that what you've got if you have that you experience as a child is then what you expect to see. So if we don't get these experiences of nature in and around where we live, that's what we'll not be missing them when we later on in years. So we want to start talking and having discussions with people about what wild means to them, and what therefore a kind of rewilding might be of urban areas, and just how much of this wildness we're prepared to have living in and around us in the city where we're working, where we're playing and where we're living. So if you have any thoughts, we'd absolutely love to hear from you about how much wild you want to have in your life and how we can make that happen in the city. So at that point, I am going to stop and I pass on to Abigail, who will be on the next for the list.
Hi everyone, so let me share my screen. Thanks so much, Rachel. Share. So I'll be talking today about how we work to connect, how we work to improve green spaces to connect nature and people. So first off, let me introduce myself. I work for the Conservation Volunteers and I lead our midweek group of volunteers, which means that every Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, I lead practical activities in the green space across Greater Manchester. So as I'm sure you're all aware, green spaces played an important role during the coronavirus lockdowns. They were used more frequently than ever on our daily walks and exercises. Urban parks with small fields and short paths were suddenly booming with new local visitors. I know I made more use of my local parks rather than going further afield. So 2/3 of people reported that their local green spaces had a positive benefit on their mental health during the lockdown. It really was a vital asset for many people, giving them a chance to get out of the house and breathe fresh air. And it's been wonderful to see so many different people enjoy their local parks and maybe discover pockets of green spaces that I've never even noticed before. Unfortunately, with more use comes more wear and tear, and people start to notice that their local green space is looking a little bit shabby, with areas of neglect or damage, or maybe they've noticed that they can't even access their green space because it's not wheelchair or pram friendly. So that's where we come in. In 2020 alone in Manchester, we planted 800 trees, we constructed 400 metres of wheelchair accessible pathway, and we worked on 70 square metres of meadow. Our work tries to find the balance between helping nature and helping people, because to us that is conservation. It's finding the balance and enabling people to enjoy nature without disturbance and giving nature a place to live without excluding the local community. So we help nature in a variety of ways, and these are probably the practical activities you'll be familiar with if you've ever done conservation practical volunteering. This can include things like removing invasive species like Himalayan balsam, which you can see there gets very tall late summer. We also plant a wide variety of native flowers that you probably saw in Rachel's presentation. And we also work and improve ponds and reed beds, as well as constructing sluices, which helps control water height in various ditches and riverways, which it became really important for the flooding in early winter this year, as some of you may remember. So our big project in 2021 involves improving Sale Water Park for willow tips, a quickly declining native bird species. And we've done this by tying dead wood to trees for nesting sites, maintaining soil moisture for invertebrates, which they use as a food source, and creating a varied canopy in the trees as their natural habitat. That's the willow tit there. Unfortunately, I did not take that picture. But nature isn't the only one that benefits from this. As I've mentioned, we work a lot on access, widening and improving pathways to ensure that people can visit their local park and green spaces. We construct bird hides out of natural materials like willow, so people can see the wildlife in their parks without disturbance. And we make a lot of benches at scenic points to allow people to pause, take a moment, and soak in the nature around them, which became more and more important with the last year. And finally, the biggest benefit, I hope, goes to our volunteers, without whom we would not be able to do the work we do. 94% of our volunteers say they feel more connected to nature when they volunteer with us. 94% again say their well-being has been improved after volunteering with us, and over 3/4 of our volunteers rated their overall experience with TCV as excellent. We work with a wide variety of people, ranging from retirees to students to young people with disabilities. We don't require any prior knowledge or experience, and we all have one thing in common, and that is a passion for nature and the community, and the want to get involved, get a little muddy or a lot muddy, and go home feeling like you've accomplished something wonderful. Connecting people to green spaces starts and ends with our volunteers. So thank you for listening. If you want to get involved, you can join in improving the green spaces of Manchester. Head over to tcb.org.uk/volunteering or shoot us an email. Sorry about that, I got a bit nervous there. And now I'll hand over to Michaela from Groundwork to discuss equity and access to nature. Thank you.
Thanks, Abigail. And I'm going to, we don't just throw this together, you know, I'm going to build on a couple of the things that you were just talking about, which is amazing. So everybody, I'm Michaela from Groundwork in Greater Manchester, and as Abigail said, I'm going to talk about a report that we've published very recently about inequalities. So I'm going to bring everybody right back down with a bump and hopefully leave us with a couple of challenges. So this is a report that's brought together the evidence and research around who's accessing our green spaces and what that means. Any references that I've got in these slides or anything that I say, you'll be able to find the background in the reports. And if you just Google it, it's there, it's very easy to find. So what do we know about who it is that that benefits from our enormous range of beautiful green and blue spaces across Greater Manchester? Well, we know that 1 in 8 households don't have their own garden or access to a green space. So we get very creative, don't we? Here's a really good example of people getting creative beyond their backyard, and a real good example of community spirit. And whilst I'm going to be talking about some real challenges that we face in thinking about inequalities to access, I'm going to use really positive photos, I hope. So hopefully we're telling a tale of what it could be as well. So we know, don't we, that people from ethnic minorities often live in the most green deprived areas, that they are less likely to be within a few minutes walk. And we know that this is also true for families that have low incomes. So most of the same things apply not only to the communities who experience racism across GM, but also those who are living in poverty. And almost 40% of people from ethnic minority backgrounds live in the most deprived areas. But when it comes to our white populations, that's only 14%. So there's a big gap here. We're not talking about bits and pieces. This makes a huge difference to people's lives. The report goes on to look at some of the barriers that we face. And I know everybody on this call will know a lot about this anyway, but we're thinking about them in terms of both our own perceptions and our experiences of our green spaces, and also the green spaces themselves. So for those perceptions and experiences, we're talking here about people in early childhood who may have had really positive or not so positive experiences of green space, or no experiences of green space, and that stays with us into our adult life and influences the choices we make. It's also about our Black and minority ethnic residents who go into a green space and see racist graffiti and the barrier what that then creates for them, and their attitude towards green space, how welcome that they feel in the green space. We hear a lot, don't we, about people who feel that green space is for other people, not for them, whether that's white people or particularly at certain times of the day, perhaps it's for young people, and that then creates a perception barrier for other people who perhaps would like to benefit and use that space. And the spaces may be designed or may be managed in such a way that that itself creates a barrier. And the Landscape Architects Institute fully acknowledge that their workforce, so the designers of our green space, are overwhelmingly white male. So what does that then do? And our parks workforce are overwhelmingly white male. So what does that then do in terms of creating that welcoming space that we want our green spaces to provide for us? And there's a piece of research around the Olympic Park in London Dr. Bridget Snaith has published, there's some good stuff on YouTube where she's presented this, that questions this. And if we are white people designing green spaces, are we designing them to our own preference? So the research goes on to explore a lot of the Black and Asian families as part of this piece of work had a preference for the more manicured green spaces because they wanted to use it as family space. They wanted a rose garden or they wanted the play space. Whereas people from middle-class white backgrounds were much more interested in the biodiversity angle and the wilding that we've been talking about. So it is about who is it that's designing the space? Who is it that manages the space? And who are they designing and managing that for? What are the preferences that they're bringing forward as part of their work? Abigail also spoke about COVID and how more people have been really valuing their green spaces and really taking advantage of what's on the doorstep. But that's not true right across the board. And so we know that there, in some ways, this created additional barriers, and some people who are fearful, perhaps of not understanding the latest restrictions, and are they allowed to go? How far are they allowed to go? Or can they keep distanced in the way that they want to? And we know that some people perhaps were turned off their green space and it wasn't that welcoming space. It was reinforced by those COVID concerns. So here's the challenge. The report comes up with 3 recommendations for us, and it is about reimagining, and so that we can be relevant for the communities that are local. This thing about us being within a 5-minute walk of green space, we need to be local, we need to be relevant. Who is it that's involved in the design? Where is the power? What are friends groups involved in the design of green spaces and the management of green spaces? And finally, this is about a cross-policy issue. This is not just about the environmental sector. This is about we know about the impact of green space and health, physical and mental health. So this is about integrating everything right across the policy agenda. So not a very uplifting 5 minutes, I think, but I think there's a lot for us to think about how we might change our practice. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rachel. No, I'm not. I was looking at Rachel. I'm sorry, I'm going to hand over to Becky, who's going to talk about our National Nature Reserve. Over to you, Becky.
Thanks, Michaela. I'll just get my screen on. I apologise, I will probably keep looking to the right because if I don't stick to what I've written, I will definitely go over time. So just watch the screen, not me. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So as Michaela said, I'm Becky and I am the Assistant Communications Officer for the Carbon Landscape Partnership. So today I'm going to be talking about how our project is helping to bring communities together. But first I'll very quickly tell you about who we are. So who are we? Formed in 2011, the Great Manchester Wetlands Partnership brought together 20 organisations with a vision that by 2025, the Great Manchester Wetlands would be a thriving, resilient and inspirational landscape that delivers real benefits to local communities and the local economy. In 2013, 48,000 hectares of wetlands, open waters, fens, wet grasslands, wet woodlands, peatlands, were designated as a nature improvement area, which we call the Great Manchester Wetlands. To help make their vision a reality, they developed their first delivery project, which was the Carbon Landscape Partnership. With funding from the National Heritage Lottery, this 5-year landscape scale partnership began in 2016. It brought together 14 organisations, which you can see here on the screen. The Carbon Landscape Partnership honed in on areas of the NIA, including wetlands of Wigan, mosslands of Salford and the Mersey corridor in Warrington. The project had 3 main aims. So to restore a derelict landscape, ensuring community and connectivity within the landscape, reconnecting people with the landscape to improve access, increase learning and volunteering opportunities, and also to instill some pride and create a community ownership really providing those skills for local people and groups, so beneficiaries to become custodians of the future. One of our recent projects that encompasses all of these were our Towards a National Nature Reserve. So in early 2022, our organisation, listed on the screen at the bottom, developed a proposal for a Wigan Flashes National Reserve. Once at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, the flashes, which stretched from Wigan to Leigh, were created through the flood subsidies of deep mining, but now they are clusters of wetlands, which include areas of sites of special scientific interest and local nature reserves, which provide an amazing home for a variety of wildlife. With over 2.8 million people on the doorstep, this proposed area is also to provide amazing places for people to get outdoors and get into nature. The project's aim was simple: to gather the evidence they needed to support a potential designation of a local urban national nature reserve and to prove why this was needed. They did this through engaging with local communities and wildlife groups to help develop management plans for the area, actively involve younger people to have their say and to help develop strategic plans for the future, provide training opportunities for people to learn about the different habitats and wildlife that they can find in their area, and also to enhance area of Wigan Flashes, including some reedbed restoration. This project was originally developed pre-pandemic. So unfortunately, just as they were getting ready to start delivering the in-person activities, they were unable to go ahead. But as you can see from this infographic, we were still able to go ahead with a lot of the things planned, which we were able to engage with over 22,500 people through our social media channels. And we were still able to put on some of our amazing workshops and events, which were really well received, which is awesome. Overall, it really was a fantastic project to be involved. I've really touched the surface on what this project really encompassed, but we do have an amazing documentary that is called The New Voices in Nature Recovery. It's certainly worth grabbing a brew and a biscuit because it is 50 minutes long to watch, but it is it's just awesome, and it really shows you know, everyone that was involved and their voices, and it's just awesome. Just go and watch it. It's on our website or on our YouTube channel. But just to try and give you a little snippet of what it's about, I've edited it down, so hopefully you should hear this play now.
It's January 2021 and we're here at the Wigan Flashes.
The fact that it exists in and of itself is a bit special.
Hopefully in the future in Wigan and Leigh, there'll be a lot more people engaging in nature and being out there and just enjoying it really.
A lot greener, I hope, a lot more connected to nature. I think that's a hopeful thought, because the more technological we get, the less likely we care about nature and that we care about our local environment. But I hope our future will take in consideration our local environment.
At the time, was no real way of getting to things.
Migrate as well. They make Bickershaw the home. You know, we found that out by volunteering.
Establishment of the Wigan Flashes as a national nature reserve is going to be both important for the amazing wildlife that we have here, from booming bitterns to ostentatious orchids, and also the community which regularly visit and use this amazing site.
There we go. So I'll stop sharing, and yeah, hopefully you can head over and watch that. But now I'm going to hand over to James from the Canals and Rivers Trust, and he's going to be talking about canals for wildlife.
Thank you very much. I am indeed. I will just do the sort of clumsy screen sharing bit and then I will crack on. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Hello, yeah, my name's James Long. I work for the Canal River Trust in the Northwest in the community engagement team. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing to transform the waterways in Greater Manchester, hopefully as well picking up on some of the points that Becky made there about how we're in the region, we're starting to reclaim spaces that are urban, that have been affected by industry, and turn them into outdoor spaces that we can all enjoy. So to start with, I will go on to the next slide. So yeah, if people aren't familiar with us, the Canal River Trust, we're a national charity, and our network of 2,000 miles of waterways, so rivers, canals, docks, lakes, stretches from the southwest of the country, from Gloucester up to Middlesbrough, and then across from Goole and the east coast over to Leeds. So we're a national charity working in England and Wales. And we're a waterways and wellbeing charity who believe that life's better by water, and that's kind of the cornerstone of our work. So caring for the waterways, but also engaging people that live around them and giving them opportunity to get involved in our work. So in Greater Manchester, basically in Manchester City, 20% of the population live within 1 kilometre of one of our waterways. So that's about a 12 to 15 minute walk, and it's about 200. So it's about 115,000 people. In the wider region, that's sort of 25%. So 1 in 4 people live within a 10, 15 minute walk of a canal or river. And those are people that we're really keen to engage, to support and encourage to enjoy our waterways. Thinking about the presentation that Michaela gave a little bit earlier, some of those communities around our canals are people that face some of those challenges, some of those issues around access and inequality. Our vision for the canals in Manchester is about making them cleaner, greener and safer for everyone to enjoy. So some of that's about ensuring that the physical environment is cared for, is safe, is welcoming, that we're doing things around making sure that the environment's clean and tackling litter, which is a real challenge for us as an organisation in the region and nationally, but also making them greener, that they're part of the built environment, but ensuring that they are a green and blue space that everybody can enjoy and will want to enjoy. So thinking about some of the other green and blue spaces that people have been chatting about today, the canals, different to them in that they were built by people and built for industry. So if you think back 200 years ago, the canals were built to connect towns and cities, to transport goods. Some of that was about moving raw materials around, so coal, cotton, things like that. And in other places it was about moving finished goods either from town to town or to ports to travel overseas and stuff. So because of that, the canals and rivers that we look after run through the centre of some of our towns and cities in the region, and that because of that they're different to other green spaces that might be more open. The canals themselves were kind of built in this sort of industrial revolution sort of boom, but quickly sort of their time wasn't necessarily as long as it could have been, and other forms of transport became more popular, more useful, more efficient, and they became disused and declined. And certainly in the northwest, most of our canals, in terms of the type of traffic they were originally designed for, had really declined, certainly by the Second World War, and they fell into disuse. And it was only then really in sort of the 60s and 70s that interest in them grew again, and it was largely through volunteers. So people like in this picture here of the Ashton Canal near Manchester City Centre, these people organised themselves, obviously managed to organise a couple of diggers as well, fair play to them, and then were able to start to restore and revive the canals. Originally, this kind of movement was driven by, I think, people that were interested in boating, so people that were sort of that as a kind of leisure or a holiday or an option for places for people to live. But obviously, the movement they started has grown, and since then, the canals in Manchester have been restored. The Rochdale Canal, which is the canal that runs through Manchester City Centre and then out over the Peatlands, was only fully restored in 2002. So that was a big piece of work involving volunteers, but also some quite serious engineering and trying to find a way to get a canal under the M60 motorway, which was a bit of a feat. So canals today, this is obviously Deansgate in town. Canals are very different to the kind of disused post-industrial space. What we've seen really, certainly in some of our city centres and the centre of our towns, canals have been sort of integral to regeneration and growth. And if you were to walk from where this picture was taken in Manchester City Centre towards Piccadilly Station, you'd pass through you pass through Castlefields, you go past Canal Street, you'd see some really built up areas of the city centre. And then also, if you think about heading north and east out the city, you've got neighbourhoods like Ancoats and New Islington, which are kind of growing and developing. And then also further out, as you head out through the city, you've got areas that are still being posted in a kind of post-industrial phase. You've got inner city housing, and then you move out to the kind of Pennine and mill towns as well. So a variety of environments. And the thing that's interesting about canals and water in general is that spending time by water is good for people's well-being. It makes people feel better, and all the evidence says that the more time you spend by water and the longer you spend, the better you feel. So the benefits grow over time. So as an organisation, as a charity, the Canal Trust, we're really keen to promote all different types of users of the canals, and whether that's people on boats or people on the towpath. We've seen over the past year that our canals have become busier than they have been for a long time, in some ways busier than they have been before. We've had more boats out on our network, and in some places in Greater Manchester, we've seen an increase in footfall on our towpaths, ranging from 40% to 100% increase of the number of people walking around and discovering the canals on their doorstep, which is fantastic, but also obviously in some places provides a challenge and creates situations that we need to make sure we're managing and improving our network constantly to meet that demand and that expectation. So as well as people enjoying canals are a great habitat for wildlife, and part of the reason for that is that nowadays, certainly the water of the canal, it's well managed, it's monitored. We have teams of ecologists, environmental scientists, hydrologists, fisheries specialists that are monitoring the water quality, and they're good for wildlife, especially species that like slow moving water, deep water. The water levels in the canals don't necessarily vary very much. You don't kind of get seasonal rise and fall, and it's a pretty stable environment. And also alongside the canal, what you find is you'll have usually the towpath, but also a kind of grass verge, a hedgerow either side of that creates a really good corridor for wildlife, birds, pollinators, plants, all kinds of wildlife that really appreciate the area around the canal, and it's really important and a vital kind of habitat for them. So two kind of key projects that we're working on at the moment in Manchester and Greater Manchester is about trying to improve the kind of habitats and improve the biodiversity around our canals. So for the past few years, we've had a rolling programme where we've been installing floating ecosystems in the Rochdale Canal. So it's sort of started in the city centre and then working kind of north and east out through the city. I was out today, early on this morning, with the organisation, the company that installs these floating gardens, doing some site visits, looking at our next location. But these are specially designed sort of modular structures that can be installed into the water. They don't get in the way of boats or other people using the waterways, which is good. And the way they're designed, the roots from the plants and trees that are planted in them go down into the water and actually help to kind of purify the water a bit and clean up the waterway as well. So this is a picture of some of what I'm talking about. So this is right in the centre of Manchester on a wintry morning. I took this photograph. So this is, we just stood here on the bridge on Princess Street looking down, which is on the corner of Princess Street and Canal Street. So these floating gardens here are the type of things I'm talking about. They're quite, like I said, they're put together modularly, installed, and then they create a bit of habitat. And what's really important and kind of good about those is if you look at that scene, it's completely the built environment. You've got brick buildings everywhere, so that the system we've got that has been put in is bringing a bit of greenery, a bit of life to that space, but also it's really important that it's creating a new habitat for wildlife and things like that. So it's a piece of work we're very pleased with, and something that we're looking to continue as we carry on through the next couple of years. And just generally, like I said, the canals themselves are as much part of the built environment as they are the kind of green, natural environment. So what we've been trying to do over the past couple of years is installing things like planters, planting hedgerows, improving trees. We've been involved in some schemes in the city centre where if trees are being lost through new developments that are being put up, we're finding spots where we can fit in new trees and hopefully sort of offset some of that. And also, this picture on the left shows, even in the city centre where we've got kind of quite urban built up environments, we're trying to introduce bits of greenery. And part of the reason behind that is around the general look, feel, environment around the towpath. We know that from a lot of feedback we get from people. Some people find our towpaths not necessarily the most inviting places, so this is all about encouraging people to spend more time there, enjoy them, appreciate them, and increase the footfall and the dwell time that people have in those areas. Another piece of work we're doing, so earlier on when Rachel was talking about people letting grass grow and how that's important for pollinators and biodiversity. This year, the Trust, we're undertaking a trial of on our towpaths. Like I said, we normally have a kind of a grass verge between the towpath and the water. We're not mowing that as much as we have done in previous years. So traditionally, it's quite intensively managed strip of green space, and some of that's for practical reasons. If you've got people mooring boats, they need to see where the green bit stops and the green watery bit starts, so they're not falling in or coming a cropper. So we've picked spots on the Ashton Canal, which runs from the city centre out past the Manchester City Stadium to Tameside, and the Peak Forest Canal, which runs in Greater Manchester, goes down through a bit of Tameside and Stockport. We're not mowing the grass as often in these areas, and we're letting the grass grow. We're monitoring it carefully to see what the effect is, and also listening to feedback from different people that use the canal to see if it's having any adverse effect on their experience. But we're hoping that by not cutting the grass as often, it means that will create a better natural environment for some of the wildlife and insects that make their home around the waterways. And probably 90% at least of all these schemes and things that we do are powered by volunteers, and that's kind of the key piece of work that underpins all we do. As a charity, we have paid staff that fulfill a range of functions, but actually growing volunteering is a really important piece of work, and something that on behalf of the Trust, that's kind of our sort of call to action today. We're really keen in people getting involved, joining us as volunteers. People can volunteer with the Trust. If you search Canal Volunteer on Google or any other search engine, it should take you onto the volunteering page of our website. We've got opportunities across Greater Manchester, so some stuff in the city centre, some stuff out in Oldham and Rochdale and Wigan and other boroughs where we've got our waterways. And these opportunities are sort of range from sort of regular work parties to being lock keepers to doing education visits with schools. So a range of opportunities. Obviously, in this day and age, we're kind of working within the COVID secure kind of framework, and all our volunteering activities kind of growing and being kind of refreshed and updated, aligned with the government roadmap. If you don't fancy joining a group and wearing a high vis or a life jacket or a blue t-shirt, what we've seen over the past year is an increase in people taking part in a national campaign, our plastics challenge. So basically, every year, 14 million pieces of plastic litter are dropped around our waterways or end up in the water or the towpath. A lot of that stays where it is and becomes a problem locally for wildlife, but also the bits of the canal network that are kind of the built environment, it kind of can cause damage and stuff to them, but also quite a significant amount of it ends up entering the ocean and becoming a global problem for wildlife. So the self-led opportunity really is about people go onto our website. There's a kind of exciting widget there where you can pledge to do some litter picking, and a toolkit of like top tips about keeping yourself safe and enjoying the water. But it's a great way for people to get active and enjoy the outdoors, but also spend a bit of time cleaning up and making a difference in the local community. So yeah, that's kind of my final thoughts. The canals and the rivers and the waterways that we care for, we are working to transform them, but there's always opportunities for people to get involved and support that work as we grow it. Thank you very much. So that is my presentation. I will stop sharing now and hand over to Liam, who's going to talk about the silent crisis and insect loss.
Hi, so my name's Liam, and unlike all the other amazing people on this talk, I am not a representative of any specific organisation. I am but a passionate observer. I will now share with you my presentation on what I like to call the quiet crisis. So the quiet crisis refers to the declining insect population, and it is largely ignored by the wider population. There are two significant ways in which insects are declining. One is the overall mass of the insect population. This in and of itself is a very difficult way to measure insect loss, as despite the declining numbers, there's still an awful lot to count. The more accurate measure of insect decline is the range of the populations, i.e. where they're found. And this has been demonstrated through loads of native species, their declines, their populations that were once found across the nation have been reduced to smaller and smaller isolated pockets. And these two factors combined lead to small isolated populations of insects that are much more susceptible to the other pressures that humanity are applying, such as herbicides and pesticides, as well as electricity interfering with navigation. So even though we're all environmentalists on this, some people might think, why is this a crisis? You know, because insects are largely seen as a nuisance rather than vital to both the natural and human world. The biggest impact that will happen from insect decline is crop failure, as 3/4 of our crops require pollination, and you know, despite their most recent positive coverage in the media, bees are not the only pollinators, and a lot of the work is done by their less popular cousins such as wasps, flies and moths. So all these insects are vital for the pollination of our crops, and beyond that, the more terrestrial insects are vital in nutrient recycling of the soil. And as there is a global crisis in soil degradation, this factor is vital to the survival of our plants. And beyond our own food source, they are also the base of all food webs across ecosystems, whether that be water, air or land. All the bigger animals that we love and admire either directly or indirectly rely on insects for their survival. So this will inevitably result in the beautiful diversity of the human and natural world being destroyed. So this seems like a massive problem, but the solutions are pretty easy, as insects by design, if given the right opportunity, will recover quickly due to their short lifespans and their ability to have mass offspring. You know, so how we can help with this process is, if you have a back garden, as we've covered before, let some of it overgrow. As Rachel covered, the nettles and other plants that we see as a nuisance are vital for the moth and butterfly life cycle. We can plant mainly native plants, you know, particularly with peat-free compost. You know, if you want longer plumage, you can mix and match with foreign plants, but our native plants are the best to attract the pollinators that we want. If you don't have a back garden to enjoy, you can get involved in your local green spaces and avoid what experts call a green desert, which is short-cut grass that is completely detrimental to insect life. You know, we can encourage meadowing and enjoy the vast array of natural wildflowers that this country has. This will help by creating green corridors that will connect the isolated insect populations and create a healthy population of insects that will then eventually bring in the larger animals that rely on them for food source. So this was a much shorter presentation than everyone else's. I hope I didn't rush it. But I hope from this talk you will have the motivation and the tools ready to help us bring nature back to the city. And I will now introduce the next speaker, who is Russell from my wild city. I think it's sharing.
Thank you very much, Liam, for a really good presentation there. And yes, I'm going to start on mine, which is the last presentation of the evening. It's flown by, and how do you follow all of these fantastic speakers we've already had? Well, what I've got for you is a presentation on what the Wildlife Trust is doing in the city of Manchester. And once I press this button for my presentation, it will automatically turn the slides over. So I will be forced to cram this into 30 seconds. So let's see how we get on. So I work for the Wildlife Trust in Manchester for the My Wild City project. And this is a project that has a vision for Manchester as a city-wide nature reserve that can be bustling with people and nature, squeezing nature into every available space. We work in collaboration with Manchester City Council and are funded by Esme Fairburn and the Cadent Foundation. And we're working with the Ecology Unit as well to deliver the local nature recovery network. Our team at the moment is myself on the far right, who joined in March. We've got Hilary Wood as well, who covers a wider area in Manchester, and someone on the left you may know, which is Ellie Sherlock, who has helped put this whole event together tonight, and she's our communications officer. So she's responsible for all the brilliant stories that come out about the discoveries we make in Manchester on some of the sites we are looking after. So obviously this story of My Wild City got disrupted, well, kind of disrupted by lockdown, but what lockdown did, as many people know, and has already been mentioned tonight, is it engaged even more people than ever before with local wildlife, whether it was cowslips at the side of the road, or even the daddy long leg spider in your cellar that you thought you were scared of, but actually was more interesting than you thought. And many people realized that just by experiencing this stuff, it really helped. There was a nearby nature report that was developed to look into what effect nature had had during the lockdown. And 67% of people said that they now classed being near to nature as much more or more important than before the lockdown restrictions, which just show how important it was to dealing with things like loneliness, isolation, anxiety. And this report was sent to number 10 Downing Street and to DEFRA. Now, this all ties in with the National Recovery Network, which is a national view of how, considering what we've heard tonight, which is the why we need to do something because nature is in decline, this is the how we can do it with the Nature Recovery Network, a 25-year plan looking at biodiversity loss, climate change, and people's well-being to try and bring nature back into our lives. And Manchester, Greater Manchester, is one of those areas. So you go down from national to regional. And the Greater Manchester Nature Recovery Network is, let's say, it's a type of a trial. And that if we prove how good nature is for all of our lives and how much it improves people's well-being, it can be replicated in other parts of the country as well. The creature at the bottom right is the green tortoise beetle, and it was found on a floating ecosystem in Boggart Hole Clough just recently by my volunteers, and that may well be a new species for Boggart Hole Clough, which is, this is my patch. So I look at a string of 4 sites in North Manchester, and this is at the neighbourhood level. This is looking at practically how do we do all of these things we've talked about? How do we squeeze nature into the cemetery, the football pitch, the primary school, the gardens? How do we improve the parks? How do we create more of a network of all these things working together? I should say that map is a draft. It's not quite finished yet, but it's almost there. The team also do plenty of digital engagement. Obviously, throughout the lockdown, we've been doing plenty. This year's Festival of Nature, which you're here tonight, so you know what that's about. The other date for that is the 27th of June this year. We also take part in the City Nature Challenge, which is earlier in the year, and we were well on our way to doing plenty of webinars during the lockdown to keep people engaged with learning what wildlife is in Manchester and how people can help. Another part we do on our social media is My Wild Garden Week, which was earlier the year in April. And it's a week talking about all the things people can do that don't cost a lot of money, don't take a lot of time, and can really have a bigger impact. If everyone does just one of these little things it can make a big difference. It could be growing sorrel in your garden or keeping the thistle, don't cut it down. And we had plenty of people looking at our posts and signing up, which was excellent. And further to that, we're also running the My Wild Garden side of my project, which is that I've got funding to offer residents wildlife kits that can kickstart their garden's nature recovery. We're starting off with bird feeders. We're going to log piles to keep insects, give them a home rather than just pollen and nectar. It's actually giving them somewhere to stay. And also we're offering some locally native wildflower seeds as well, so that we can help spread wildlife around. That was very quick for me. I don't know about for you. But yeah, that is me in a nutshell. So if you've got any questions from my talk, or I suppose any of our talks, then please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
Brilliant. I'm going to actually clap. Sort of silently clapping. That was amazing. Thank you to all our speakers. Hopefully that gives you a little taster of the incredible work that is happening for wildlife in Greater Manchester. It is but a drop in the water, I assure you. We could fill probably days at a time talking about all of the various projects and work that is going on. So it's fantastic to hear from various organisations about the work that they're doing. Michaela, it was obviously fantastic to be talking as well about equality in our wildlife and our green spaces. I think it's so important, such an important thing to be discussing. You know, if we're going to fight the climate crisis, the wildlife crisis, we need everyone on board, and so it's so important that we are talking about it, and that we are taking action as well for that. I mean, certainly I think, you know, Manchester being the heart of the Industrial Revolution, it has a responsibility to be leading the way for the green one too. Why not? We're innovators over here. And, you know, I'd love to see us change the statement of it's grim up north to it's green up north. Oh, how wonderful. Ooh. So I've written down a few of my favourite things that got said during the talks. I mean, people were cheering when Rachel said that we should stop calling wildflowers weeds, we should call them volunteers. I love that. Yes, absolutely. Did you also pick up on the wonderful Ostentatious Orchids by Joss Stars? How lovely, a poet with words. And I also loved from Liam's talk, you know, so positive. We always talk about how dramatic the insect decline is, but knowing that they can bounce back quickly, that was just so, oh, we can change this. This is fantastic. So I will stop waffling on now. But we do have a little bit of time for some questions, and I do know that we have some questions in the chat. So let me try to find one, because we had one specifically, Jenny, for you, which started it was quite high up. It was about, is it true that, let me try and find the actual question for us. That's probably easier, isn't it? Or I don't know if you've got it there in front of you.
I don't have it in front of me, but I'm fairly sure it was along the lines of asking whether peatlands can actively continue to sequester carbon, because I think the person that was asking the questions, some people have said to her, oh, well, you know, it's only the carbon. Found it. Thank you, Russell. It's only the carbon that are within peat, and you know, and it's not continuing to do it. And then there's a second part I'll come on to. Yeah, basically, when peatlands are in a healthy condition, they actively are absorbing carbon from the atmosphere all the time. So all plants will do this. Through photosynthesis, they absorb carbon into their cells. But what's really wonderful about peatlands is that carbon goes down into the peat and it stays there. So with a tree or something, part of the cycle life is that when that tree then dies and falls down, that carbon will get released, which clearly isn't an issue when we're living in a really lovely, healthy ecosystem. But that's where peatlands just kind of, you know, they put their little superhero capes on. And yeah, so peatlands will literally suck carbon out of the atmosphere. It gets sequestered into the peat, and then it sits there, and it sits there forever, because peat just continues ever so slowly, 1 millimetre a year. Peat forms that, but ever so slowly that peat continues to form, and then all that carbon just sits within it. But as I was saying, as soon as it's damaged, that carbon gets released. So yeah, so it is really important that we need to look after them. And the question was also, I've heard from gardeners that peat is used in other industries and that horticulture is only a small element of use. Is that the case, or can I safely tell them that it's rubbish? You can safely tell them that it's rubbish, because yeah, peat does get used in other industries, not as much now as it used to. Peat used to get used for fuel a lot. It still does in some areas around the world, but places like in Ireland, where that used to be a really big industry, Board Namona, which is like the Irish peat board, no longer cut peat for fuel. They used to have like power stations that ran off it and things, and that has stopped, basically because there's no peat left, but they'll tell you it's because they're being very green. That's just my opinion, it's right. But yeah, every single bit of peat that we can save is really precious, and it will genuinely make a difference to our fight against climate change. So yes, please tell anyone that, oh, a little bit of peat in my garden, it doesn't matter. Well, it does. So.
Brilliant, thank you. We had another question about, has anyone ever mapped the bee habitats in Manchester or in Greater Manchester? Does anyone know anything about that, or about kind of mapping species at all to help conserve them?
I would guess that the information might be in the biological records and within the local record centre, really. So they would be the ones mapping what lives where. Some of that, the county recorders who would be out and doing their sort of regular checks about the species that are around. Although obviously I'm a bit more familiar with the plant side of things, but it would also be true for the bees and other insects. Specifically, whether anyone has created a nice bee map. Yeah, Bee Conservation Trust, that's a good point, David. Might well have done so. But certainly I've not seen anything published or come across anything on a website where you could like browse where people have seen things. It'd be quite exciting for the city of Manchester, I think, to be able to go and see places where you might be able to spot certain kind of bees. It might be a cool idea for someone.
Russell, did you have anything to add to that, or?
Only in that, in terms of recording, this comes into general species, but for my project, I'm looking at iNaturalist, which many of you will be familiar with. It's a citizen science project, which, although it doesn't officially go into the record centre's official records, it's a nice way to quickly jump on, and you can set certain criteria on it. So if you just want to look at bees in Manchester, you can kind of tell it to give you those records that the public have seen. And it's not necessarily always going to tell you what kind of bee it is. It might just say bumblebee, but it'll give you a good idea. And so that might be a nice thing to play around with. It could give you quite a nice looking map and show you lots of dots on the map as to where either where the bees are or where the most recorders are that are recording the bees.
Yeah, iNaturalist is brilliant, isn't it? I do love iNaturalist, but also important to mention the record centre as well, which we should be using both, really, shouldn't we? I'd say if you want to be a super keen recorder in GM, then do both. Why not do both? Something about buff-tailed bumblebees, lovely. Sale Water Park, buff-tailed bumblebees, check it out. So I kind of had a bit of a question to kind of put out to you. Obviously, you know, Abby and Russell, and I think a few other of the presenters as well today sort of touched on lockdown. We cannot have a conversation without mentioning lockdown and COVID, can we? But it has changed, I think, our relationship with nature. It's shown us how important nature is for our lives. And you know, we've been forced to stay local, and I think that's forced a lot of people to realise just how wonderful that their local nature is, that they don't have to go out and find it, and there's been a newfound appreciation for nature. But my question is, how do we harness that? Now that people are really, you know, they get it, they know how important it is, does anyone have any kind of ideas, suggestions, things that they're doing, want to throw some ideas around about potentially how we kind of harness that and kind of go forward with that? Because ultimately, you know, nature saved us, so how do we return the favour? I don't know if anyone wants to jump in on that, and it's potentially quite a hard question. Yeah, Michaela?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start us off, because I'm sure everybody's got an opinion. And there is no easy answer, and that's why we're all kind of sat here going, you go first, you go first. I guess, you know, going back to some of the things that we were talking about, the whole thing about 20-minute neighbourhoods, so this is bigger actually than the conversation we're having tonight. This is about the economy, you know, people staying locally, really investing in their local community. So for me, making sure that we capitalise on people's renewed love of what's local nature for them, however they see it, blue, green, manicured, rough as I don't know what, you know, however they see it, it's just making sure that there is something there for them. And so I think us in our planning of activities, not just planning green space, but planning of our activities and how we develop neighbourhoods generally, we have to take into account a change perhaps in our behaviours, in that we want to stay local. We don't want to all go into Manchester or wherever it is that we live for whatever it is that we want to do or enjoy or buy or whatever. It is about forming that neighbourhood that is really quite self-contained, and that we can do what we want to do in it. We can enjoy what we want to enjoy in our local neighbourhood. We can socialise in the way that we want to socialise in our local neighbourhood, and we can stay well in the way that we want to stay well in our local neighbourhood. So it's a big challenge for us, I guess, is my very short answer. I think, Liam, you also put your hand up, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, the key thing for me is empowering people and letting people know that they very much can do something to protect it. But also it comes back to your presentation, Michaela. It's about accessibility. You know, these local spaces on our doorstep, you know, are they welcoming to everyone? Are there things that we need to be doing to make them more accessible to people? And I think it's just kind of having those conversations, isn't it? Liam, did I see you put your hand up, or am I unfairly picking on you?
No, I did. The official hand raise and the visual.
Ooh, I tried to give your internet is not very good, Liam.
Let's get people engaged in the local environment. Now that we've all opened up, people are now hopping straight back into their cars.
I might stop your video, Liam, because that seemed to really help last time.
Can you
want to maybe
speak slower?
Yeah, I can hear you a bit better now, actually.
Is my internet all right, or?
Do you maybe want to start again?
Right.
Sorry, Liam.
That better?
Yeah.
Right, that's perfect. So yeah, I think, I will do. Sorry about my bad internet. So now I have people to walk more, because immediately once lockdown ended, people hopped straight back into their cars, and then if they wanted to enjoy green space, they'd drive to one of the big parks in Manchester. But if we encourage people to use cars less and actually engage in their local environment, then people will be able to get a lot more direct enjoyment out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, thank you, Liam. Thank you for that. Rachel, very diligently with her hand up there, like we're at school.
Thanks, Miss. What was I going to say now? I've been silly. Yeah, I was thinking about, because as you've been saying, Michaela, I think lockdown has shown us how green spaces are important to us, but also how they're not necessarily working in the ways that we need them to in the places that they are. And so I think what we really need to do in future is to think more carefully about all those places that we have, whether it's, you know, like the work that James is talking about for the Canal and River Trust, and deciding on, can we test out whether we can mow less on our verges, and then that means that, you know, you can leave the big area somewhere else in, say, Bugsworth Basin, where people can have a nice picnic together and so on, and being a bit more clever, as Russell is talking about squeezing nature into those different spaces so that it's meeting lots of needs of all the different users, both people and non-people. And I think the thing for me is that, you know, and I think about why I got into nature, it's about the things that I experienced as a kid. And so what worries me is that if it becomes increasingly more difficult for you to have encountered things as a child, that is then something you carry through into adulthood, and it's always something you're afraid of, it's something that's not for you. And so it's about making sure, as you say, that those things are local and that you can really have a kind of meaningful exposure to something that is exciting but not worrying, and welcoming and not threatening. And so I think we've just got to do an awful lot more thinking around what our spaces can do for us and all the different kind of needs that we need to get out of them, which is, you know, not a small task. So lots of work to do, I think.
Lots of work to do. Good thing we're all just so brilliant and there's so many of us, isn't it? Russell?
I just wanted to say, Rachel, that your analogy of places being good for humans and non-humans is a great way of describing what we're all doing here, and I think that tagline should run.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brilliant. Wow, gosh, this event has gone so quickly. I did want to go round to all the panelists actually and just ask them for one thing that people can start doing right away to help nature local to them. So shall we go in the order of the presentations? That sounds, Russell loves that. Jenny is giving me big scowls and she is not going to talk to me tomorrow. Jenny, do you need more time? I can go to someone else.
No, that's fine. I can always talk about peat. Yeah, for me, if there's one thing that everyone could do tomorrow, it's to love your peat and go peat free in the garden. It's you know, it's as simple as that. When you go to the garden centre, if that bag of compost does not have peat free splashed all over it in great big letters, don't buy it. And if you can't find anything that says it's peat free, go and ask your retailers, say, I want peat free compost, where is it? And ask them about the plants as well. Are your plants grown in peat free? Well, then I don't want them. So find me some peat free plants, you know, get your peat angry on. So yeah.
Jenny lives in a constant state of peat anger, don't you?
I really do. People refuse to go to garden centres with me now.
Fantastic. Great. I'm really glad that you're at that point in your career. So, Rachel, top tip from you, please.
I just have to say first, I think my phrase is going to be peat angry. I want to think about that for a while. So I think I want to say taking notice, really. So about what's around you, how it works, how it could be different, looking into the details, you know, do you see a butterfly landing on that bush that's growing in the neighbour's garden, or the softening of the edge of the street because you've got some mosses creeping in and things. So just to kind of be mindful and looking really when you're in and around your local area, as the first step to kind of appreciating what you've got and thinking about how it could be different.
Great, thank you so much. Abby, your turn, please.
As someone who works for the Conservation Volunteers, I feel like it's pretty obvious what I'm going to say. But volunteer, so it doesn't have to be a full day's work. Obviously, a lot of people have full-time careers and they don't have a lot of time to volunteer. It can be as simple as going on a 5-minute walk and just doing a tiny litter pick and popping the rubbish by the bin bag in the bin, probably the best idea. But yeah, the little things that you have time for, every little bit makes a difference, even if it's pulling out like 1 or 2 pieces of Himalayan balsam when you're walking your dog, or just telling other people to volunteer. Just getting involved, I think, is one of the big things people can do.
Thanks, Abby. Litter picking is a great one, and actually you can request a free litter picking kit from your council. Mine arrived this week. Very exciting, very exciting. Okay, so now we're on to Michaela, your top tip, please.
Oh, I'm just laughing because Russell's got his in front of him. That's great. And so if there's one thing that we can all do tomorrow, for me, it's stop and speak to your neighbours about the green and blue spaces around us. Ask them what their favourite place is. Ask them about their garden or their window box or the alley that you share. And try and understand why it's important to them. And I think just as us getting to know our neighbours a little more is a good thing anyway, but getting to know why they value what they value and what it gives to them, I think just broadens our understanding of the natural world and why we need the diversity that Rachel was talking about earlier.
Completely agree, Michaela. Becky, you're next.
Yeah, mine was very similar to that. Now the panic of trying to think of something else, but I can't. But I suppose it basically is getting other people involved, spreading the message, you know, follow things, share things, you know, get involved. The more people that know about it, hopefully we'll build this community where we can protect these green spaces and build on them. You know, we can keep screaming at the top of our lungs of what we want, but at the end of the day, you know, we don't have direct contact to every single person in the country, so spread the message. It's good as it gets from me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's a great one, Becky, and on the spot too. Look at you go.
Panic.
Panic. James, do you have a top tip?
Yes, I was just looking on the list of participants to see if there was anyone called Pete or Peter who was in the session who might be enjoying just having the name repeated out loud. My top tip, I think, would be about if you've been spending more time outdoors locally during lockdown. There's some chats in the comment too about walking, cycling, and using different forms of transport. If you've been getting outdoors more during the lockdown, even as you know the rules and the restrictions about what we're allowed to do are changing, carry on spending as much time as possible in local outdoor green spaces, green and blue spaces, whatever near you, and yeah, just keep enjoying them, because I think that's a very important part of keeping those places kind of loved and cared for and looked after.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. Now on to Liam. So we can't see Liam anymore, but hopefully we can hear Liam. But you are muted, so I will just let you know that right
now. So what I would say is, if this talk has ignited a passion for the natural world in you, is you could engage your local authorities. Because my dad was a local councillor for an area in Blackpool, and the amount of complaints he got from uncut grass verges was quite unreal. But if we, as people who are passionate about the wildlife, get together and promote a more wild environment to the local authority, they might start to change their practices. And that's quite an easy way to get engaged. You know, a quick angry email to your local authority is all it takes.
Yes, we must all embody Angry Pete. Pete, who is our new mascot.
I'd like to point out that most people in peatland conservation are absolutely lovely. They're not angry at all.
Yeah, it's just Jenny raging.
Everyone else is great, it's just me.
No, Jenny is also very lovely. And Russell, you're last, so yours needs to be the best, I'm afraid.
Well, what I'll do then is I'll say that rather than start tomorrow, you could start tonight, because you could start recording wildlife on your phone tonight by downloading one of a couple of apps. We cannot protect what we don't know is already living here, and there will be species in Manchester that we currently don't know are here if they're not recorded. So if you find something you don't know what it is, a flower, a beetle, a footprint, then you can take a picture on iNaturalist, and iNaturalist could suggest what it is, and the community on iNaturalist will also agree or disagree, and you can start building up your knowledge basis. Once you've done that, if you see something that you're like, oh, I now know what that is, then you can put it on something called iRecord, which is very similar to iNaturalist, the difference being that iRecord records get accepted as official records, and that goes into conservation. And then when you're really into it, you can actually do it direct to the ecology unit's website, which is maybe a little bit more technical, but once you're there, you're over the hill then. And yeah, you could too discover something brand new. You could get your name on the first record of something in Greater Manchester as it appears. Wouldn't that be exciting? And Russell, you actually can claim that for Broadhurst Clough. Well, hopefully, yes. Oh, wait, that's a good point, actually, because at Broadhurst Clough, we had 2 new species of bat recently on a bat walk, because although there have been bats there for years, and there's been bat walks in that park for years, nobody recorded the bats. So when you look on the official list, they weren't there, and therefore there weren't any bats. And all it takes is for someone to put in a record and say, I saw this at this date at this place, and then it appears. And so I can officially say that recently I had 2 new species of bat in Broadhurst Clough, and the public found them. It was great. And 1 new species of newt as well. That is just incredible. And wasn't that a smooth segue, a smooth transition there, I thought, from me? So I'm sure we could talk all evening, but we can't because we do need to go to sleep and have dinner and other various things. But this is not the end of the conversation at all. Please do get in touch with us. We'd love to carry on talking to you about what we can do together, what we are doing, and the ways that you can get involved in protecting the fantastic wildlife and wild places that we have here in Manchester and Greater Manchester. So here are some contact details. Here are some more contact details. Probably jotting them all down furiously. Don't worry, I'm sure you will be able to find us at a later point. And some more contact details there. So yeah, as I say, let's keep this conversation going. Let's not end it here. Let's keep moving on with the green revolution for Greater Manchester. So with that, a big, huge thank you to all of our speakers. I know it was very difficult to keep to 5 minutes. It was a very hard thing of me to ask you to do, but it was really, really fascinating. And I think people in the chat are saying that they really, really liked it. So a big thank you to you guys, and a big thank you to everyone who joined us today as well. And final plug for our second
webinar event which is happening as part of MFoN 2021, and that's happening on the Sunday the 27th of June at 10 AM, and that is going to be hosted by our incredible youth panel who put us to shame, I must say. They are brilliant. So don't miss that. Thank you all for tuning in, and have a lovely evening. Bye.